everyone, I'm Jessica and I'm 1/3 of Hello Hemlock. You can find me on my personal channel, Foolish Oats, as well as my wedding channel, Wilbur and Ethel. I'm from Ontario and I live just outside of Toronto. Right now my city is making international headlines with our doofus of a mayor and bad journalism. Ontario is a very lush province. Ontario is host to the nation's capital, which is Ottawa, so that's where our parliament is. Ontario itself is very, very vast. You could travel north from the very bottom of Ontario for an entire day and still not reach the top. Most of Ontario's residents live much further south than that. Toronto is probably one of the most southernmost points of Canada, and Toronto sits right on one of the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario. Ontario is probably best known for its rolling hills, its proximity to Parliament, and the commerce of Toronto. There's also many natural resources farmed in Ontario, as well as lots of geological landmarks. One of my least favorite Canadian stereotypes is probably the accent. I actually remember reading somewhere that the Toronto accent was one that a lot of actors would learn because it's very pleasing to the ear, and it's also very accepted on television and in movies. I think that says something about its placelessness. So I find it really strange when people talk about a Canadian accent. I feel like we all kind of talk a bit differently from one another. I feel like if you're from the north, you're very different to how people talk from the south. Not only that, I find that the West Coast has a very interesting, a very kind of a slower cadence to the rest of us, whereas the East Coast kind of reminds me of their Irish ancestors. Also, I hate poutine. I'm a severe minority though. I have seen things like Parliament Hill and so on, but I think the most Canadian I've ever felt is when I stood in the ocean when I was visiting Halifax. Even as I was trying to figure out my answer for this question, I wasn't really sure how to describe what it felt like standing in the ocean. I used to go to Florida every year with my family, and so I played around in the ocean, swum in the ocean, had stingrays swimming underneath me, and that was a really cool experience. But having stepped into the ocean from Canadian soil was a much different experience for me, and something that I had never really done before. I was there in 2000 for the tall ships, and something about being away from home myself kind of made me feel really connected to the whole process of these ships sailing into a harbor. Like I said, it was the most Canadian that I've ever felt, and I think that was because I was literally standing at the edge of our nation where it meets the rest of the world. I'm very sad to say that I actually don't have a favorite Canadian author, and that's a big reason that I wanted to become a part of this channel. I know and I've heard that there are lots of great Canadian authors out there, and I'm very disappointed in myself for not having celebrated all the great work that's out there. There's actually a lot of good Canadian bands, and they aren't Nickelback. Broken Social Scene, Stars, Metric, Feist, Emily Haines, Amy Milan, they all kind of work together and collaborate pretty seamlessly. Still Life Still, Arcade Fire, obviously, The Weaker Thans, Elliot Brood, Winter Sleep, The Wooden Sky, Nico Case and the New Pornographers, Chaos, Wolf Parade, Mother Mother, The Deers, Islands, Destroyers. A very Canadian book that I want to read is Shake Hands with the Devil. This is a book about Romeo Dallaire. He was the Canadian who was called in to serve as the force commander in the UN assistance mission in Rwanda. At that time, he thought that he was entering a nation where there were two opposite sides that really wanted to gain some sort of peace treaty. As most of us know, Rwanda's civil war ended up being one of the most atrocious genocides in recent history. Historically, Canadians have made kind of a name for ourselves by being kind of the international peacekeepers. In recent years, however, due to governmental and policy changes, we haven't actually been doing a whole lot of that. I'd be really interested to read this book not only because of the story itself, but to see somebody's perspective who, at that time, we were on that global scale, such huge peacekeepers, and we were putting our money where our mouth was. I can only assume that Romeo Dallaire was, at that time, very proud of what he would have thought to be our Canadian identity. I spent many years studying what it means to be a Canadian and how we define that unified sense of nationalistic pride. As a nation, we have roots in colonial France and England. Our calendars match the Christian traditions, and we like to call ourselves peacekeepers and a cultural mosaic, especially when pitting ourselves against our southern neighbors who kind of have a bad rap for being a bit of a melting pot. But personally, I'm not so quick to adopt these signifiers. I grew up with my grandparents considering home to be Aberdeen and Belfast, respectively. My mother and her brothers were born in Zimbabwe, which is a land that doesn't exist in the colonial bubble that they knew it as. My mother is one of the people that actually consider there to be a very distinct and identifiable Canadian spirit and Canadian identity. She claims that we do have a space in this world that is united and definable. But I'm not so sure, and I don't think it's that easy. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you really enjoy all the content that we're going to be creating here at Hello Hemlock. Bye! Oh, there they are. That's pretty. You don't get to see.